The oceans. Need I say more? Home to one of the Lord's most rightfully hated creatures, this entire zone appears to be nothing but a monument to the horrors that can be born out of this earth. I am of course talking about the anglerfish, with their bodies larger than anyone even realizes and their face that need a thermonuclear 90-ton ordnance dropped inches away from it. It's safe to say that the ocean is a place that is not only a relatively unknown to humanity, but because of its arrogance to create such horrors, needs to be nuked. Along with the true terrors of the deep, there are many tales of lesser horrors lurking within its depths. The Kraken, for instance, being a species that has long thought to existed according to captains and their crew who were attacked, and despite damage to their ships looking like giant suckers, nobody really thought they were true or alive until the discovery of the colossal squid, which is known to try and attack ships, which was directly observed. Other creatures, such as the giant sea spider living around 13,100 feet, around 4,000 meters, I believe, below the surface in heathen units, houses its organs within its legs and hunts the sea floor like they hunt inside your house right now. One could be sneaking up on you. But some legends remain mythological, rumors of giant sapient eldritch horrors that affect the minds of humans and is said to bring into existence the end of humanity. But could it ever really be ready for, once again, a tactical nuke to the face? When you have the power of a god, you may as well use it on another god. In the events of Gods of the Deep, that is exactly what we are talking about today. As a crew finds a portal in the newly discovered deepest area of the ocean, something is waiting for them down there. But how does it inflict the hallucinations that we have seen, and why is it stuck? Well, let's discuss all of that in today's episode. But first, this episode is sponsored by Incogni. Are you ready to take back your internet privacy today? If you are tired of companies aggregating your information and making money off of it, then go to incogni.com/Roanoke and use code Roanoke to get an exclusive offer of 60% off. That's incogni.com/Roanoke and use code Roanoke, or click the link below to take your personal data off the market. Every day, thousands of companies pull up a picture of you on a grainy computer screen as two brothers talk about trading this info. Info like your full name, email, home address, social security, phone number, and IP information, as well as many other pieces of information to boot. They can do this by buying the information off others who could have obtained it by nefarious means, such as, let's say you signed up for a newsletter, they got hacked, they pull your email address and phone number. Or let's say you sign up for some big company and then they have a data breach, well, they have all of your info after that point. All of a sudden, you're getting calls, emails, and junk mail targeting you. Let Incogni do the dirty work for you. They track down who has your information and then formally request them to delete it, which is hilarious as that company had to pay for it to harass you in the first place, and now they are legally obligated to get rid of it. So if you are ready to take back your internet privacy, go to incogni.com/Roanoke and use code Roanoke to get an exclusive offer of 60% off. That's incogni.com/Roanoke and use code Roanoke, or click the link below to take your personal data off the market. All right, let's get back to it. But before moving on, I want to thank you guys for watching. If you enjoyed, then leave a like, would be awesome of you, because without you guys, none of this would even be possible, so I do appreciate your support. Check out Roanoke Tales for, cryptids and true crime stuff, apparently. It's basically an amalgamation of whatever I find interesting. And check out the Discord for movies that we watch that end up here. Links for all of that in the description. We kick off our story with a warning. Why are you watching this? Why have you done this? Why did I watch this? Who's to say? But obviously, go and support the original creators of this abomination, because good God in heaven almighty, the stage props alone are literal trash can lids. Like, I am not even joking. Has this channel fallen off? Will I ever reclaim the level of science I once had? Find out on the next episode of Roanoke's Mental Breakdown. As we move through the water, I hate it. Ominous water music continues to play as three men in hazmat suits with no gloves on check out a boat. So wait, you're telling me that it's a dangerous enough sight for one guy to even be wearing a gas mask, indicating that there are particulates in the air that you would not want in your lungs, yet proper PPE isn't necessary? Like, one guy's not even wearing a gas mask. I believe they may have been taking the piss out of this one. We will see more evidence for this hypothesis later. As one of the men then brings over a box, they set it down while they call up to the surface as everything has been recorded. They leave the box there and then nope out. Back in some random 1980s lab, they then flip on a TV to see a portal in the water as a woman says, "We've found it." Yes, a butthole at the bottom of the sea. Very good. Jumping over to the Miskatonic University, which somebody's gonna say that's not how you pronounce it, Julia Goldstein is there to recruit the illustrious Professor Jim here. He talks about how he doesn't want to do talks about his father anymore, which is understandable. He does his own research. She knows, as their company pretty much funds his entire astrobiology research. He literally says, "I'm not interested in any more handouts from the Pigman Company." Bro, you're not interested in your research being funded? You're not interested in paying your bills? You're not interested in eating food? What in the holy hell? I'm gonna make my own astrobiology program with blackjack and hookers. Also, astrobiology is a bit of an interesting one. As we all know, according to Dr. Serrano from Dead Space 3's professor, it's all just dead space, despite the fact that they were on an alien world actively finding frozen aliens, indicating that life in the universe was entirely possible. Of course, then again, the professor wasn't there, so maybe at the time it was just dead space. Anyhow, astrobiology is rather interesting because it's a blossoming subject for our current time period. Their entire basis is to study the possibility of life beyond our own world. The problem is, you really just have to look at markers that could hint at life. That's really all they can do. Finding life has remained elusive thus far, but it's not like we can really look with our own eyes much further than our immediate solar system, and even then, places like Europa, which may in fact house life underneath its icy surface, indicate that these creatures are basically just space anglerfish, which once again, why would we want anything to do with that? So this guy getting funded to look for life elsewhere should probably be, taking the handouts that he can get and not really turning his nose up at anything. So she informs him that the company is looking for people in the expedition that they are forming. They found a trench in the Drake Passage that descends around 37,000 feet. This will be really stupid here later for one main reason, but we'll kind of get there when we get there. So as they take a look at the circular hole thing, she thinks it's a portal. Getting everyone ready for a synergy meeting, Julia informs everyone of everyone else and what they are even doing here. The Grinch then stands in the background and doesn't say anything as Hank gets up, who's the lead engineer. They have built a deep diving submersible, Providence 3. Lacking all the weaknesses of its predecessors and keeping all the strengths, they went ahead this time and connected it to a PS3 controller, giving them more capability and better connection stability. What could possibly go wrong? Hank continues to say it's incredibly safe as he assures us no expense was spared except for the cardboard airlock. What could possibly go wrong? He continues on talking about how they will be entering the portal and all signs point to it being completely safe, so there's nothing to worry about. What could possibly go? Julia adds to this by saying their technology is 100% safe, and she bases this on absolutely nothing because our technology has never really been that deep. So, I mean, granted, we did send rovers prior, so I'm assuming the trash can that they enter into and then head down is made similarly. So continuing their great debate, the Grinch then breaks in saying the ocean is the last great frontier of the world. I disagree. And I have nothing to back up that statement, I just don't like the deep ocean. He then launches into the discussion of how this is his greatest discovery, and Jimbo keeps looking completely stunned, like a complete putz, anyways, doesn't matter. They will need to complete 2 months of training prior to the dive, but the real question is, why? The Grinch then talks to Jimmy Neutron about how his dad would be proud of him and how they need him out there. So after that meeting, where everyone agrees to go, they then head over to some area of the building to eat Chinese food and drink beer, completely hotboxing the restaurant with that combination. Jim then talks to Christine, which interestingly, for some reason I kept calling her Michelle in my script later. I have no idea why. So they talk about the crushing pressure of the ocean. It has basically been a gate to us because of the dangers of descending. Like an ocean gate, if you will. They then cheers as Christine says she needs to get some fresh air. Again, probably because they were hotboxing the restaurant. Jim Boy gets up to go talk to her as he's interested, and also main question, where is this restaurant at? This is a bit of a bizarre building. So of course, I mean, maybe it's not a restaurant, but a break room? I don't know. So she talks to her about if it scares him or not. So for some reason, I have no idea what the cameraman was doing in this scene, but it keeps jumping around to both of them despite who is talking, like it doesn't even matter. Absolute cinema, I say. Jim then says he wishes he had his dad back, but he is gone without a trace and he's never coming home. That's the ocean for you. Once you go missing out there, recovery is attempted, but it's not usually successful. Actually, having just been on a cruise, I need to remind everyone that the ocean is basically a giant desert. When a cruise ship goes by, animals may choose to follow it as food gets thrown off of it all the time. A lot of people think cruises are completely safe, but you are essentially in a floating building surrounded by tigers. If you jump into that water, sharks usually follow close behind because they are following the fish that are looking for scraps that fall off. Stay on the boat, stay alive. Or when you enter the water, you'll just kind of watch the ship continue on, and next thing you know, you'll see fins coming towards you, which is not a great way to go. So Christine is worried as then she shows her son, who she claims is 7 months old, but that offspring looks way older than that. So we jump ahead 2 months later where the offspring is now 9 months old. In literally Antarctica. Apparently in this remote area, someone built a dock and they have a no mooring sign put on it. Like, was mooring that big of an issue out here? Anyways, not a huge deal, but it's a permanent structure, and I mean, there are some in Antarctica, but doesn't, whatever. So also, shouldn't Jimmy be covered up? It's Antarctica. Alright, so now we get the most unhinged part of this movie, which is a cinematic masterpiece as long as you don't think too much about it. This submersible is under the water, right? It is completely unmanned and it's just floating there. They clearly have it just vibing well below in frigid waters of Antarctica. They at no point bring it to the surface. Remember this. So as the team then calls back to another remote team where Julie is, they get ready for the mission. Continuing their boating adventure, they get to the submersible somehow, open the door, and then someone throws a bucket of water down, indicating that there was water let in through the airlock. Okay, so you're telling me, rather than just bring it to the surface, they had to dive down to this thing and then enter an airlock. Then some water got in. However, when they got down there, they're all still wearing their jackets and are completely dry. I am so confused by this movie. I think this is intentional. It has to be. Also, that ladder does not look secure in the slightest. Also, when Christine climbs down, she hits the opening of the porthole and it moves like a disturbing amount. I absolutely love it. So security jumps down screaming about how they have 20 hours of oxygen, so let's not waste it. Again, they're all bone dry. How did they get down there? And why are they already on the clock with oxygen? Why didn't you just bring it to the surface? Jim then emerges into the ship and looks around. Heroic music begins to swell, which is absolutely hilarious, as he states this is not like the simulations. Christine tells him, well, Jim, you're just collecting rock samples. It's not like we're landing on Mars, and I feel like Mars is probably a lot safer than the bottom of the ocean. So the Grinch enters next as the ship moves pretty much all around him as he says, remarkable. Wouldn't say that, man. So Hank then folds up the little giant ladder, which I imagine is where most of the budget went, as then he grabs a literal trash can lid. Like, editor, zoom in on that thing. That's what they're sealing the airlock with. My God. So reporting the hatch is secure, I have no idea why he would think that. They are ready to continue their dive down. Descending further, the ship begins shaking as for some reason, it now smooths out. Hank then comes over and claims if it collapses, they'll all be jelly in moments, as somehow Jimmy John didn't know this. Given current events, or recent past events I suppose, we all know this was a major possibility. Now, as long as you didn't use graphene for several dives before, causing micro cracks in the structure, and then ignore all your engineers telling you this is going to be a problem, you should pretty much be good to go, probably. So the Grinch now enters the soon-to-be stoner psychedelic area, which has a bead doorway that seemingly doesn't need to exist. As then taking a look around, he then hones in, looking at the fish tank. As everyone descends, Security Boy is quite nervous. Starting their dive even further, they get down to 100 meters, as then they hit like 10,500 meters like 3 seconds later. And in 400 meters, they will have set a new record. Jim gets ready to enter the crappiest looking rover I have ever seen as they pull the cardboard up, closing off the airlock, as Christine tells them they need to come and see this. They pull up the screen as, what is going on with Jim's face? Like, when they were filming this, did they not tell this man to pull back the look of shock? Maybe like 40% on this one? Nope, good enough you say? All right, is this movie a money laundering scheme? Probably. So they talk about the ocean's butthole for a while, their words not mine, as the captain eases them into the ocean gateway. Phrasing on all that, the Grinch now goes and sees water is leaking in. I assure you, Hank spared no expense on building this complete piece of crap, as they lose thrusters almost immediately entering the gateway. Some form of audio appears over the radio as everyone sees the same thing within their heads. Historically, not awesome. So with that, the submersible is now just completely vibing there. They all freak out as everyone keeps outranking everyone else on what to do. There is no authority hierarchy here, just be aware of that. It's pretty much everyone just yelling at everyone else. So giving Security Boy the flashlight, the Grinch is just sort of tweaking out as he says, they found them. Getting a call on the radio again, they are informed that they have been silent for about 3 hours. This will never be explained. It will never really come back up, and it will never be an issue again. Checking their life support, yep, it has decreased around 3 hours. Also, what's interesting is how did they regain communication in the first place? They didn't really do anything. So something I want to talk about before moving on is what will be said here in a moment, but the same thing is what affected them in the first place, being these hallucinations. I bet you are supposing we will talk about mirror neurons. You think I would devolve down to just that. Wrong. I mean, maybe a little, but we're not going to really discuss it because I feel like I've been talking about mirror neurons too much, but we will be discussing the brain pretty heavily. And concerning the brain, it's going to be its electromagnetism, as a statement made here a little bit like humanity's brilliant minds are completely unprotected, which the solution that I think could fix all of this is quite hilarious, and it falls right in line with this movie. So let's start with the basics of human biology. Your brain produces a very minute electrical field. This field works both ways according to current research. Not only is it produced, but these waves can be affected, which in turn has the ability to alter behavior as a result. This can take place through disrupting the electrical communication communication within the brain. So when a neuron is no longer able to fire in the capacity that it once did, this can lead to many different interferences and outcomes based on location that particular neuron is being affected, concerning like its location in the brain. So let's say, for the sake of argument, that disruption of neuronal communication happens specifically in the area of the brain known as the prefrontal cortex, located within the frontal lobe. This area of the brain is associated with planning, emotional control, and a sense of self. By subduing communication, this in turn could make someone, say, more emotional, as they are less capable of controlling themselves. Along with this, planning and logical responses to situations would become more difficult to maintain, making you probably a little more careless or reckless concerning what you should do in response to a significant threat. Another area of the brain, such as the amygdala, if communication is disrupted, this can cause paranoia and fear to increase, as well as aggression levels to start trending upwards towards other people. This issue would stem further into the group dynamics, making others begin to behave in a similar manner as people begin turning on one another. We can see how the internal brain communication is intrinsically linked to pretty much the whole operation of life, but in this instance with the crew, we see specifically two areas of the brain that would need to be affected. First, the suprachiasmatic nucleus located within the hypothalamus and the visual association cortex, with specifically probably going to be Brodmann areas 18 and 19, receiving some sort of irritation leading to a decrease in communication. Concerning the suprachiasmatic nucleus on the brain, it's clear their timekeeping ability went completely out the window as they lost 3 hours without even being aware. Now, this could be a petit mal seizure, which is basically, it's where you zone out. In fact, a lot of people have petit mal seizures. They're not considered to be that bad, just pretty much benign, or not really good, not really bad. It's just kind of your brain having a small seizure as a treat, so to speak. But it's basically you can zone out, and it's really hard to get people to kind of come back. And they didn't realize that they were even gone in that time frame. They're just kind of like, they just continue on as usual. A lot of people will actually have these when they're sleeping. Anyways, so it's highly unlikely that they were teleported to the future, but it's almost like being put under anesthesia for a surgery. What could be several hours feels almost instantaneous to you. When I got my wisdom teeth out, they told me to count back from 10. I made it to 7, and the next thing I know, or at least that I could comprehend, I was waking back up several hours later. This area of the brain, if disrupted, causes the brain to have no concept of the passage of time. It's a bit of a surreal thing to explain as a concept to a healthy brain because it seems almost impossible. But this just highlights how the brain functioning as it does is nothing short of amazing. Concerning the Brodmann areas 18 and 19, subduing function in this area is critical to what is known as a complex visual hallucination. These hallucinations can literally superimpose images such as faces or scenes over what you are actually looking at, although I also believe it to be another thing, which we're going to talk about here again, but this kind of highlights how your brain actually works. Whether you see anything or not, it's actually not really your eyes kind of deciphering this information. They are just taking in the information. In fact, your eyes actually see everything upside down. That is the information that is reported back to the brain itself. The occipital lobe is responsible for taking this information, flipping it, and allowing it to be properly presented to the rest of the brain for interpretation. I actually like to quote an example, or at least two examples concerning this and how complicated this process is, and if something is off, it can completely change what you see. So a man in his 40s actually had his vision restored from a complete life of blindness. Like, he never had eyesight as a youngling, and due to it, the areas of the brain that he had never developed concerning eyesight. Now, this is not to say that his brain was underdeveloped by any stretch of the imagination. The reality is, due to neuroplasticity, the areas that would have been associated with eyesight were just utilized for other functions. So when they restored his eyesight, the first year, he had no idea what he was even looking at despite having the ability to see. He said he could see colors, but it was almost overwhelming. He had no visual memory, so to speak, so he couldn't base anything that he was looking at, which was all new coming information, on anything else. So he said it was sort of like visual noise. Over time it got better because his brain will eventually learn things, but it being completely new to him meant that for the first year of his life, and likely even still after, probably by now he's good to go, as this was like a decade ago I saw this, but he would have to basically re-blind himself by shutting his eyes or putting on really dark glasses in order to not be overwhelmed by this incoming information. He would basically have to see the world for 15 minutes at a time and then stop for the entire day. This is vision without memory or association. But what is no vision with memory and association? I have this. When I get migraines, I get blind spots, but they aren't blind in the standard sense. Like, it's not just blackness. Essentially, let's say we were broing out, right? And I was looking directly at you, and in that instance, I get a migraine. Your face basically becomes Slender Man without any features because I can't actually see it. But my brain knows that you have a skin covering and that your head is there. There's just no reporting information concerning your features, as the migraine has pretty much disrupted this. But my brain, using context clues and knowing you should have a face, attempts to build one, or at least what's around it. So by filling in this information, it helps bridge that gap. When I was 19, it was absolutely horrifying when I got my first instance of this. Now at 32, I just kind of find it annoying and I have to wait until it passes. But the point of talking about any of this is that the brain itself is what is allowing you to see. If this was to be altered in a large enough way, you will in fact see whatever that alteration is, despite what is going on around you. I know this seems kind of simplistic, but the reality is sight can definitely be changed due to neuronal communication, and all of reality is just us deciphering with meat what is going on, which means we could all be wrong as to what reality even is in the first place. But that kind of starts treading into the philosophical reasoning. So back to the movie, because we still need to understand how electromagnetism affects neurons. We can't just stop at, oh yeah, it does it, because that is not what built this channel. That would be lame. So looking at an aquatic Stonehenge, decayed stone structures big as mountains allegedly, Jimmy tells the pilot to pan down as when they start looking at whatever is down there. I'm kind of confused how they lost radio signal for 3 hours, did nothing, and still got it back. That's never explained. I suppose they could have just been ignoring the signal, but the operator confirmed after her first statement that they lost the ship entirely. So that implies it was somehow out of range. I get it's a portal, but they didn't fix it. Anywho, they see some form of life as the pilot says impossible, and this is going to be his entire persona now. So Julia informs Mr. Beast to get a tissue sample. Why did I call him Mr. Beast? Because now I get to put it in the tags. Haha! Anyways, why would you want a tissue sample? Who knows, that's the fun. So the Grinch comes over saying, "This is the answer to our deepest wonders." Yeah, a whale fall? Checks out. He says it's on Jimbo as they ready the get ocean gated into the water. Entering what would be absolutely frigid temperatures, he then boards to what amounts to an underwater go-kart that is way too small, spared no expense. They drop him and then close the cardboard doors, which should totally hold the pressure at bay. Hopefully that thing isn't load-bearing cardboard. And then somehow they pressurize it as Jim continues his descent. I'd say into madness, but this whole movie is that. He's at 38,000 feet as Hank then opens up the cardboard once more. He keeps going through the wreckage as then he approaches the creature. The creature being that thing, not the spinning cat or whatever it is. So he goes to get the sample as he says it's like a cephalopod, as Christine then notices it's not decomposing. The pilot again says impossible as an argument breaks out once more as everyone just overrides everyone else. This is literally the South Park episode where it's like, I'm in charge here, and then it was like, not now you are. That is this movie. So the Grinch then says deep sea gigantism on an epic scale. The thing then stands up, that can't be good, and I'm pretty sure this is supposed to be Cthulhu, but oh my god. Anyway, so the Grinch then nopes out down the hallway as, is that the Shadow Man? Literally, look, he wants you to look at his fingers. God bless it, I love this movie. So Christine leaves to do something as she says somehow they are bringing them in. The creature howls as electromagnetism is detected within the air, and it reaches out for the ship as they start trying to ascend, and Michelle and/or Christine, again, I don't know why I wrote Michelle, falls into the cardboard airlock. Hank tries to open it by force. Okay, but has never done arm day once in his life. Hank then calls out to the pilot telling them not to open the airlocks as she will be crushed by the ocean pressure. So turning around, he immediately pushes a button and it opens quite easily. Why did you not do that earlier? Security boy then descends with a stylish head wound because the electromagnetism pulled him into a guardrail for instance, or for some reason, I have no idea. And then he pulls Christine out. Cthulhu is just absolutely vibing, doing nothing, as then the bunks start getting flooded. He never made contact with the ship. So Christine is dead. As security man extraordinaire over here goes to deliver the worst CPR I've ever seen. Yes, shaking her face should totally work, very good. Giving up almost immediately, Hank leaves to go seal the bunk rooms as Jim is waiting outside. As he says he's getting into position, Hank then passes the Grinch, taking a nap on the floor. Entering the bunk room, Hank then calls in and says he's going to seal the door. They then drop weights as they begin their ascent, as Jim literally tries to get out of the rover. What are you doing? Hank is now trapped in the bunk room as the Grinch approaches looking at him. The Grinch then starts talking about how their minds are defenseless against the creatures. as then he just kind of lets Hank drown. So now we get to talk about electromagnetism and how it affects the neurons a little more in depth, because what I just witnessed was too stupid for words. To typically induce hallucinations on this scale, as well as the increase in aggression, typically you're going to require the inhibiting of neuronal firing, which has always been interesting, as the general feeling is it's like if you have an overactive imagination, this would imply more firing, but when you see things that aren't there, it's quite the opposite. That's true. Electromagnetism is thought to have difficulty at inhibiting neurons firing at higher frequencies, but appears to have a greater impact on neurons firing at lower frequencies. This phenomenon is called state-dependent magnetic inhibition, and this is accomplished by directly interfering with the movement of ions across the neuron's membrane. Because remember, a depolarization event is dependent upon a membrane opening, allowing for sodium ions to enter the neuron, which in turn allows for a more negative charge across the membrane to dissipate and become a more positive environment, thus depolarized. It repolarizes through the opposite mechanism involving the outflow of potassium ions, which, repolarizes it. But electromagnetism interferes with this process, thus stopping the neuron from either firing, or it can cause it to fire more. So the question is, what is a low frequency neuron and what is a high frequency neuron? Well, low frequency neurons refer to neurons that fire at a relatively slow rate, generating electrical signals with a low frequency, typically within the range of brainwave activity considered low frequency, like the delta and theta waves, which are important for functions like sleep and spatial navigation. Essentially, they respond to a stimuli with slower, more prolonged electrical activity compared to high-frequency neurons that fire rapidly. High-frequency neurons refer to neurons that fire action potentials at a very rapid rate, producing electrical signals with a high frequency, often associated with brain activity involved in complex cognitive functions like attention, perception, and memory consolidation. These high-frequency signals are sometimes called high-frequency oscillations, or HFOs, and are typically measured in the gamma band above 30 Hertz on an EEG recording. So why is this an issue? If theta and delta waves are inhibited while awake completely, it would likely lead to increased alertness, which is not a bad thing, but you would have difficulty relaxing, problems with memory consolidation, and potentially impaired cognitive function, as these brainwave frequencies are typically associated with drowsiness, deep relaxation, and memory processing during sleep and certain meditative states. Mostly these waves are associated with sleep, but if completely inhibited, this could lead to issues that we are seeing with the crew. This electromagnetism is clearly being released from the creature, which the Grinch is correct. Our brains are defenseless because this screws with the internal biochemistry and electrical communication within the brain. However, there is a way to overcome this, which we'll talk about later, but while higher frequency neurons are more difficult to affect with electromagnetisms, remember electromagnetism can inhibit or increase this rate. It may be that the electromagnetism released by this creature is force firing the lower frequency neurons more often, and this would essentially be like being awake but asleep at the same time. You are able to move, but these waves are interfering with your ability to discern reality. It's sort of like having sleep paralysis where you're asleep but you're stuck, right? The dream state becomes the waking state, and they both affect each other. So this could cause the entire crew to be in sort of a surreal dream-like trance, affecting their ability to plan accordingly and understand what is real and what isn't. This results in the Shadow Man showing you his fingers. Okay, so Jim gets back now, right? I think they are alleging that he swam out there. And what's funny is they said earlier that he was actually at 1,100 meters. You didn't hear it, but I did. And if he opened that rover at those pressures, he would become like instantly, he would just be fertilizing the ocean floor. So he finds Christine, as then he administers proper CPR, and then somehow she's able to come back. Which, okay, here's the problem with that. Your brain has about 6 minutes of oxygen, give or take, before permanent brain damage kicks off. Within 10 minutes, you are brain dead. I am more than certain he would just basically be reviving a vegetable. But reviving her, she then coughs up water and is totally okay. Based on my explanation that I just gave, I don't think this would happen at all. Who cares? So let's just all say that we love this movie and moving on. So Security Boy then gave up after like 3 seconds because he's, a chode, but they just kind of have a nice hug over it. Giving her the locker room towel from Starsky and Hutch, Security says a lot of the crew are gone and the pilot is no longer piloting the ship because he's down there with them. Bro, you might want to go back to your job. So they have a cigarette over the lost crew, as now they only have 3 hours of life support left. Better burn it up with a cigarette smoke. The rover then starts shaking as the tissue samples start moving. The Grinch now arrives, holding his head, looking at the sample, indicating it's going to change everything they thought they knew. I don't know about that one, brother. So they decide to seal it in the lab, right? As opposed to like the pressure lock. Taking a plastic bargain bin out and transferring it to a fish tank. This movie is unironically hilarious. The pilot then tells him to be careful as they are 3 hours from the surface and that's how much air they have. Taking a look at the fish tank, it appears mostly to be adipose tissue. It's still reactive and evidently it senses them, which means this creature is basically a giant supercell, which is important later. Being composed of a supercell essentially means each cell is able to exist by itself and will divide into what it wants. But they also appear to colonize rather than just be individual. So you can kind of think of them like a supercell, basically being cancer. So the Grinch and Jim disagree as a tentacle then emerges from the adipose tissue. According to the videos on the internet, that is not a good sign of things to come. So the Grinch then leaves as Christine, the biologist, says they don't know what this is. So they cover it in plastic wrap they got from probably the box the fish tank came in from Amazon. Yeah, that should cover all this. As security starts locking and loading Brides of Christ, Julia then calls down to them saying that they need the sample. The Grinch then sees this exchange as he finds a slimy keypad. Entering the psychedelic room once more and moving through the bead curtains, he starts totally stripping down, which I did not need to see any of this. Once again, the internet indicates something is about to happen. It's not good. So rubbing the slime on his body, oh great heavens! Something starts happening while he's leaning over with the adipose tissue. We're just gonna kind of move on. Jim and Christine are changing. I don't know why they had to do this. And no lie, Jim is just absolutely mad dogging her visually. Like, look at this dude's eyes. Jim then says he heard something from his dad when he was down there and how this is not normal. Good call, Jim. So they share a moment as he says none of them were entirely sane. Yeah, you don't say there, brother. Have you seen your facial expressions? The pilot now calls up saying they are 2 hours from the surface. As he starts hearing a previous recording from the creature, he sees it on screen and then lets out a yell. Seeing the pot room, Christine then pulls back the bead curtain and finds plants are growing. Why? We're not really sure. So she goes up to shut the door, but touches the goo on the keypad. Looking up, the Grinch then emerges as he yells, I don't know, a raptor? He's lost. He's just lost in the sauce, I guess. He jumps down completely into the airlock as Jimmy now goes and grabs the axe, trying to open the cardboard airlock with an axe. I have no clue how he intended to get leverage. I don't care. Security now arrives to exposition dump on basically everyone, talking about how the Grinch contracted the Christmas spirit and he was down here for research, not riches. But security man doesn't care. He's gonna take up the mantle as the Grinch. He tells them his only plan is to get rich. Ain't we all? He asks if they think he's scared of a couple of brainiacs. Sick burn, brother. Christine tries to tell him it's in their thoughts. She talks about how her son needs her and blah, 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 and how she will take him out also if he tries to take her out. Jimmy tells her not to agitate him as he just kind of runs off, pretty heroic, as then they start to kind of just hear this squelching noise. Back in the stoner room, security enters with his head hurting as there's a bunch of kudzu and random stuff. Cutting off a piece of that delicious tissue, he gets goo all over his hands. Heading back to the pilot's nest, Jim then hears his dad as the pilot is absolutely tweaking. He says he always knew he would find them one day. It's your father possessing the pilot. Engaging in a crash out of the century, clearly there are two consciousnesses in there as Jimmy then gets pushed with the pilot having taken the axe, leading to a system failure as then he goes ham on the controls. So this may seem a bit odd, but once again, you need to understand the role of electromagnetism and the brain. There's this idea that if you could apply the right frequency to the right area, you could essentially cause a neuron to fire in a manner that you would like it to. And this functionally is going to work like mind control. Of course, the pilot is still in there, so his own brain is trying to fire in a way that it would like to, but this interruption with another consciousness being pushed through, dictated by the magnetism of another mind, is creating some issues. Like having background vocals over a song that someone else is singing louder. You can kind of hear the vocals in the background if you focus on them, but the front and center vocals are going to be much louder and take kind of more precedence. That is essentially what electromagnetism is doing to the brain. But back to the movie. So they lose the signal as security then leaves with the Thanksgiving ham over there, as then he finds Jimmy knocked out. He lights up the pilot, which does absolutely nothing for a while, as then Christine knocks the force multiplier out of security's hand with the axe, as then it lands on Jim, which then wakes him up. So a fight ensues upstairs as security gets hit in the face and then laughs, as then she just stabs him in the leg with the axe. Probably shouldn't have been focused on laughing there, brother. Ditching the axe, great idea. She goes to Jim, who's now woken up. They pull back the cardboard airlock doors as she reloads the same empty mag and then gets the chains to drop by shooting them. Good God. Entering the Get Ocean Gated once more, security begins to try to crawl away at an incredibly slow pace as looking back, a tentacle emerges from the pilot. really good time to push through and run away from this one. Jimmy then heads back to grab a flare as he lights it and then heads back into the totally tubular stoner room. Saying it's time to make calamari, he lights it on fire and then just shoots it a bunch of times, while yelling like a complete psycho. Unfortunately for him, the Shadow Man appears once more. He answers the phone and his security laughing at him. The Shadow Man does absolutely nothing, except stand in the corner, as security shows back up to attack Ocean Gate Part 2 as he chases Jimmy off, who literally just hid behind the doorway, but the guy didn't think to look there. They fight as Jimmy is a giant nerd who never lifts, so he gets overpowered pretty quickly, and then lighting up security though, he drops him as he approaches him. He grabs an axe and just keeps, again, this look. He's just mad dogging him once more. I've never seen anything quite like it. A tentacle then emerges from his body as once again Jimmy takes the shot. So Christine has already descended as he goes and then closes the airlock, leaving himself to be imploded with the ship. Hearing his father's voice, he then gets up and starts looking around the ship, entering a hallway once more. Finding the Shadow Man showing his fingers again, he calls out to him as then the ship implodes. Back on the surface 2 days later, Michelle's in the hospital as she is awoken by a nurse. Julia is there to tell her that she was found drifting. Christine then accuses Julia of killing all of them as then she starts freaking out. Remembering the goo she got on her hands from earlier, she says she got what she wanted as tentacles then emerge, splashing Julia in the face with blood as she starts crashing out over this, laughing. Okay then. And thus concludes Gods of the Deep. Sensational. So we need to wrap this up with two discussions. First, what is this goo? This goo appears to be an infectious material that potentially seeds life. Again, I think it's a supercell, so if this is the case, then that means the creature down there is literally here to probably seed life on this rock. Starting deep within the oceans, which is where life is hypothesized to begin in the first place, hydrothermal vents being the area of particular interest, which as always, we do have no idea how the leap from organic molecules to life is truly accomplished. It's still pretty much up in the air for now, but anyhow, this life is most definitely infectious and appears to have a body plan that can grow within people who are infected. It does not appear that the DNA of the host is afflicted, but clearly nutrients in the body would be taken to grow this life internally. Because of this, we can kind of label this as a parasite, as it is in no way beneficial to the host and steals from the body. The second thing we need to discuss is, as promised, how can you avoid this creature actually affecting your mind? Well, I thought long and hard about this, did my research, put in the man hours, and sticking with the line of absolute insanity in this movie, this one is actually rather easy. Believe it or not, I think the main way to prevent this from happening are tinfoil hats. Tinfoil can actually block certain frequencies of electromagnetic waves, and considering the cardboard airlocks, the trash can hatches, this cheap protection apparatus would fall beautifully in line with the budget and the theme, protecting the crew from Cthulhu or whatever the crap that thing is called, ensuring critical mission success for all. Man, they really should have just hired me on this one. I would have had spared several expenses and got them back safely. But anyhow, I want to hear what you guys think. Is this Cthulhu or is this just some other crackhead thing? Who's to know? But with that, I want to thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did enjoy, leaving a like would be great of you as it helps get the video out there, and subscribing is also awesome, as in 2025, I'm trying to get to 1.25 million subs. Help me get there, and I will love you forever. I'll drop my Twitter, Discord, Patreon, Roanoke Tales, and Games link in the description, but speaking of patrons, I'd like to thank mine real quick. First, I'd like to thank our astronauts, Army and Tristan Kessick. Thank you guys for the awesome support. Next, I'd like to thank our astrophysicist, Death Dancer, and Feather. Thank you guys as well. And my scientists, Dakota23, Invictus Echo, Metric System, and Official Texan, as well as, don't forget, Felix Hellstrom. I do appreciate y'all's support. And then the rest of my patrons, you guys are absolute ballers. Keeps everything running smoothly and is greatly appreciated. But all right, that's gonna do it for me. I hope everyone enjoyed, and I will see y'all in the next one.